Hi, and welcome to Periergy. Today, we're going to start a brand new series on the programming language called Python. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe. It's free, and you can always change your mind. Python is a programming language made for AI, which is artificial intelligence, data science, but it can do almost anything. It's really easy to learn, it's free, and it's full of already written code that you can use. But if you're a programmer and you're a beginner programmer, I would not suggest starting with Python because it's easy, but it will be harder for you to pick up other languages. And as a programmer, you will want to pick up other languages. I started with C++ as the first programming language. So if you want, you can check out my C++ course, which is going on right now on my channel. All right, in the description, you can find the links for Windows, macOS, and Linux to install both Python in this IDE. Now, the IDE is the Integrated Development Environment. It's the place where we're going to code in Python. This one particularly is called Visual Studio Code. And if you follow the link in the description, you'll be going to be facing this view. And the first thing that you want to do is open a folder. To do that, you can go in File, Open Folder, and then choose Folder. I've already opened the folder, and that's gonna be that's the path that you want to put your files in, and then you can just create a new file with a right click and new file, and I'm gonna name this one main.py. The extension py is the extension for Python. You can close this tab, and then you have to check two things. The first one is if you have the Python extension installed, you can go right here, look for Python, and if you wait just a bit, there it is. So this is the extension that you want to install. Is the default. It's made by Microsoft. The next thing that you want to check is if your interpreter, your compiler, was installed correctly. Now you can press Control Shift and then the letter P, and then search for select interpreter. And then you should choose one of the Python versions that you have. Mine is 3.7.7 and it's the 64-bit. Then you can go ahead and try to run your first code. You can print hello world, copy this code, don't worry what it means. And if you hit this button and this window creates and it just says hello world, everything was installed correctly. Now, Python is a programming language, and as a programming language, it does not understand every word in the English dictionary, but it's only going to understand some keywords that you can use to tell Python to do stuff. But you can actually write inside the code English words. They are called comments, and this comments allow you to take notes on your code if you want to look at it later in the future and you want to understand it. Or for professionals, it's used for groups. When you're in a group, well, you want to comment your code so that other people can understand what you did. There are two types of comments in Python. The first one is followed by this sign, and then this is called a line comment because it's a comment that is just on one line. Now to make this view a little bit bigger, I'm just gonna close this just to clicking on it, and then I can write this as a comment. The second type of comment is a multi-line comment, and the way to write it is just put 3 double quotes and then give it a space and another 3 double quotes. Inside these, you can create a multi-line comment. Like this is a multi-line comment. This is usually seen on top of really big programs, and it describes how the program works, the copyright of it, and all those kind of things. And these comments are just for the programmer. So the compiler, which is a thing that we're going to talk next about, is going to ignore this. So if you try to run the code, nothing will happen. As you can see, nothing happened. The next thing that I want to talk about is what's a compiler. Now, a compiler is a really important concept in programming. Now, you might know that the computer can only understand zeros and ones. So when you write code, and remember that the code that we're going to write is going to be made up by a lot of keywords, which are going to be English keywords, and something has to take the job to translate those keywords into machine code, which is just zeros and one. And this translation is called compilation. And the thing that does this translation is the compiler. The compiler in Python is actually built with other languages. Now, there are a few types of compilers in Python, and it depends on the version of Python. Now, there are a lot of versions of Python. The first one that comes to my mind, for example, is CPython. Now, the CPython version has a compiler that was built on the C programming language, which is one of the oldest programming language, the one on which C++ is based. Another version of Python, though, the one written with Java, which it's another old programming language. And these two compilers work differently, but the same thing they do. They translate all the keywords that you write in Python into machine code because the machine, the computer, can only understand zeros and one, and the compiler is going to translate English into those. Now, before we introduce any keyword in Python, well, actually, we've already introduced one. I didn't talk about it, but the sprint statement is the thing that you saw to see if your program was being built and compiled correctly, and that was the way to see if your Visual Studio, your IDE was working and Python was working. But before we introduce any other or we explain what the print is, I want to talk about what are data types. Now, applications with Python, of course we're going to build application, and they're probably going to be console application. I'm going to explain what a console is later. This application all need a way to store information. And this way to store information is going to store things that are called data. The data is this information. And in Python, you can have different kinds of information. And these different kinds are called data types. The first data types is integers, or actually, more generally, numbers. The numbers are the first data types that I want to talk about. And to write a number in Python, you can, of course, use everything you would use in math. For example, numbers, then a dot, other numbers, and of course, you can also put an hyphen or a minus sign, the way you want to call it, in front to make it negative. But there are a difference between numbers in Python. Python supports three types of numbers. The first one is integers. Integers. Integer numbers are numbers that do not have the decimal part. So this would be an integer number, this would be an integer number, or even this would be an integer number. Second type of numbers that Python supports are floats. A float number is a number that instead can have a decimal part. This would be an integer, a floating point number, or even the negative part, the negative side of that. And then even this one can be a floating point number, because in programming, this is treated as a float, as a floating point number, and not as an integer because you've added the point zero. And then Python actually supports another type of numbers, which are called complex numbers, which is a thing that you learn in mathematics, a complex number that not every programmer use actually. So I'm just going to say that it supports it, and the imaginary part is indicated with the coefficient j. The second data type that we have in Python is text. But the way to call text in programming is string. A string is just plain text, as I said, and you can use almost any character to in this text, but the way to write text in Python is to put it inside double quotes or single quotes. Now, there's a slight difference between them and when to use them. Now, text can be written in both of them, but if you have text like this, periergy, because this has a single quotes inside it, you must use this double quotes. Or instead, if you have my name, or actually my dog's name, I cannot use that one. I'm sorry. My name is periergy. If you have the double quotes, you can only put them inside the single quotes. But there's actually another way to do that, and that's to escape the single quote or the double quote. So you can put everything inside double quotes, and then if you have to use double quotes, like my name is periergy, you can just put a backslash, and that's called escaping the character. And you can see that it turns to yellow, but before it was orange. And you can do the same with this, and this is going to be plain text just fine. It's the same as this one. And of course, you can do the same inside single quotes. But yeah, that's the way to do it. And before we end this video, let's talk about the last data types that we have in Python, and that is Boolean values. Now, a Boolean is really simple. It can only contain a value of true, and you can see that it turns blue, or false. Now, the only way to write a Boolean in Python is to have the capital T. If you don't have the capital T, you're not going to have a Boolean, because this is another thing in Python. This is actually could be considered a variable, and it's going to be considered a variable by the compiler. So you have to put them capital. And the last thing that I want to talk about is the print statement. Now, we've seen those kind of stuff, those data types, that we've seen this before, and I didn't explain what this was. Now, there's a way for us to visualize these data types in, let's say, what in programming we would call a console. And if I try to write a data type inside here, like two, inside this brackets, this circular brackets, and then run the code is going to be run. And this terminal, this is called terminal or console, is going to show up with the two. And the print statement just allows you to see whatever you put inside here written to the console. Now, you might not see why this is helpful right now, but you will definitely see that in the future. And you cannot only put numbers in here. Of course, you can put, that was an integer. You can put, of course, a floating point number. You can put a complex number, and you can put a string, or you can put a bool. For example, let me put this bool. That's a bool, that's true, and it's going to be written true. Thank you for watching. I hope you have enjoyed. See you in the next video.